Obviously, New Zealand against Uruguay. New Zealand themselves have put out a bit of a mixed squad. Do you think the game's going to progress?
I think it'll be very similar to the Italian game.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, that game was the speed of the game beat the Italians. If you look at that game, the French versus New Zealand first game, and then the game against Italy was a total different team. It was like that they've realised that they've got to lift the ante, and when the All Blacks want to perform, they'll perform. And the good thing about it is obviously is that you can see the smile on the faces of the players. It's hard work, but they enjoyed it, and that's what rugby's supposed to be about. And that's when the All Blacks are very, very dangerous. Uruguay, unfortunately, going to be up against it. I think the All Blacks are going to go out there. They'll throw the ball around everywhere, and the speed and I think the skill factor is going to be very telling.
Hmm. And in terms of the game they played against Italy, the Italians themselves didn't exactly put pressure on the New Zealand line. The Kiwi defence wasn't particularly challenged. And there was actually an article that came out in one of the main Kiwi newspapers this week saying that the All Black defence is something that hasn't been challenged. And perhaps against the likes of South Africa in the past, they have come up short. Now, Uruguay, sort of, albeit to them, there won't be a huge opposition as one of the tier one nations will be. But do you think the All Blacks will struggle when they do come to a more attacking minded team?
Well, I don't think they'll struggle. I just think the thing is in World Cups, you don't really want to be sort of peak too early. If you look at most World Cups, if you look at 2019, England beat New Zealand, on the Saturday. Then on the Sunday, it was Wales versus South Africa, and it was a very boring game. But England on the Saturday played really well. So that was their one game of the tournaments. Do you know what I mean? Every team's got one game. And I just think that the way it's going, the All Blacks will obviously a mixed team. But the scary thing is that, you're going to probably win by 40, 50, 60 points. And then the next week, you're going to come up against a brick wall of defence. And then you've got to start to work your way around it. We saw that in the France-New Zealand game, that the French were just, they dominated the game, and New Zealand didn't have a game plan B. And even the players that came on, they didn't really impact the game, which, normally the players that come on do. So I think that's, that was past. They're going to learn. They've got some fantastic individual players, but again, it's going to be a lot easier game than I think a lot of people, and probably a lot easier game than the Italian game.
And in terms of the Italian game, they do, of course, come up against the tournament favourites and hosts, France. There's not an awful lot to say from my end, but I can imagine you've got a thing or two to say about how this one might turn out.
Yeah, I think the Italians, they've been playing some good rugby. And I think in the last couple of years against France, they've done pretty well. They've got some really interesting players. Again, last week they tried very hard against the All Blacks, but it was just, I think that last 30 minutes they just sort of had no idea what was happening. Against France, they'll give France a run for their money. But again, will they go for the 80 minutes? All you got to do is win. All you got to do is get the 5 points. It's no good going breaking your backside out there and trying to do, win by 100. It's really about trying to get through where the players aren't injured. And I think also now combinations are going to be vital, because you're going into the quarters, and the more you play together, the easier the games are under pressure. And again, the French have got obviously Dupont. What's happening with him? Is he back in the squad? Is he? Who knows?
Yes. Well, that's the thing. He's had his face surgery, and he's expected to be returning for the quarterfinal. Now that could be a big quarterfinal against South Africa, some of the hardest hitters in world rugby. So it sort of depends on sort of whether he's going to have that confidence to play with the sort of the strength and the aggression that he normally does, or whether that facial injury is going to cause any problems in that quarters.
Well, you don't run with your face, so I suppose that's probably one good thing.
On that, Dave.
No, but yeah.
if you were a selector and you say you get a 70% Dupont in a quarter final, would you rather have one of the backup scrum halves start the last pool match and the quarter and then get him back at 90% for a semi-final, possibly?
No,
Or
definitely. I think that's
definitely.
as I said, I think the French, as I said, they've been in 3 World Cup finals so far. So this is really I mean, they've been the probably form team. If you think about rugby, the way they've played for the last couple of years, and playing at home, yeah, I think that's right. I would rest upon, because the longer he rests, the better he's going to be. But it's interesting, Pimpy, the South African guy who busted his cheekbone, like he's gone home. So, I mean, Dupont's obviously, a couple of painkillers, mate. I mean, as I said, it's an opportunity to win a Rugby World Cup, and French are desperately wanting to win something. So I would do that. I'd get the number 2 out, because also, if he plays more games, and Dupont doesn't play, they can only play half a game, at least that guy knows he's got the combinations. He's already been there, done that, and that really helps.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially given that their 2 backups are arguably talented enough to start for a lot of other countries anyway. So it's not that they're putting an
Yeah, true.
amateur, you know. Yeah.
Well, I just think it depends on the pressure from the opposition, who they're going to target. And, the Dupont's a very, very courageous little guy, and he doesn't take the ball to the line, but he always looks to offload. There's not many number 9s in the world that does that, and I mean, that's what his uniqueness is. And that's what he brings to the team to get him on the front foot. Maybe the other halfbacks don't do that, so the opposition will probably have a better defensive pattern against that.
In terms of Dupont, there's been a lot of talk about him being one of the greatest to have ever played the game, even at such a young age of 26. So from your standpoint, where does he rank in the all-time greats?
Yeah, I agree. So, yeah, look, it's the game's changed a lot, and it's actually great to see the French move away from that All Black sort of structure stuff. And, even my wife Lara was saying, you look at the stadiums in France are unbelievable.
Yeah.
Rugby is alive and kicking there, if you compare to our, when we play in our stadiums and things like that. He's been one of those players for the last, couple of years, probably more than a couple of years. And I think you've got to give credit to the coach, because coaches are the ones who allow players to play their natural game. And for example, you look at Eddie, you look at the coaches now playing or coaching. Look at the Fijian coach against Australia. He sat there. There was no emotion. He just watched the game. Then you get other coaches, going their hands around. And I just think when you've got a player who's played at that level in that position, and he's got Dupont, who's unbelievable. I mean, he must be so proud that the coach has got, he knows that's what the player's looking for. And he's got great combinations. And I think that's what the feel of the game is, as the French say. You've got to feel the game sometimes. And every time Dupont runs, he puts the pressure on the opposition, and that's what you really want.
Now, obviously, Wales are one of the surprising teams in this World Cup to have done particularly well. Granted, they've not had the hardest of groups. Apologies to Australia for that one. But they are looking at ending up top of their group, and that's subject to them taking apart Georgia at the weekend. How do you see that game going?
Yeah, look, I think again, there's no easy game. We saw Georgia last week, and those teams in Portugal, they've got nothing to lose. They'll have a go. And I think that's what's so good about the World Cup. But I think realistically, and we've talked about this many, many years ago I think at a World Cup, it's really unfair. Teams like Romania, who don't really get to play Tier 1 countries, turn up and get beat by 90 points. I think it's just really unfair. Uruguay, Romania, Namibia. I don't even know who Namibia played to get into the World Cup, because they don't play the big boys.
I think they played 6 tests in 2 years. 6 tests in 2 years. Sorry, David, not to cut across. It's yeah.
Oh, that's fine, but that's what I mean. I mean, I can remember 2007, the World Cup in France. Fiji, on their way to the World Cup, played a couple of games in England to warm up.
Hmm.
You know, you've got Australia, New Zealand playing week in, week out, South Africa. I mean, it's really targeted for the top 8 teams in the world, Rugby World Cup. It's not about the rest. So maybe they do a not a minnows, but I mean a pool B or something where the teams like that, and whoever tops that league gets a chance to go to the quarters. You know, but you can't really expect Namibia to turn up, who played again. I don't know how many games or where the players come from. To turn up on an international stage and play some of the best teams in the world, and you got a chance of winning. You know, that's very sad. But you know, if you go to the soccer World Cup, football World Cup, you've got no idea who's going to win. You have got no idea. But win the rugby, if you look at this pool, A and B have got 4 of the best teams in the world. So you're going to lose 2 of the best teams in the world in one weekend. It's bizarre. Then you go to the other pool and you've got 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in the competition. You know, so how does that work out? So why would you do a draw 18 months out from a World Cup? Just because of where you're ranked. That's absolutely bizarre. You know, they should do it 6 months out. This is the draw. Off you go. And again, you know, it's very sad, but you know, the Romanians, the Portugal team, look, they've got some great. They love the opportunity. They play some great rugby, and I must admit, the supporters have been unbelievable. You know, every game you've seen, the Portuguese are just going bonkers. You've got the Georgians, you know, and I think that's what rugby's about. Even though they know they're not going to win, but they still support their team as much as they can. I think that's fantastic.
The South Africa Tonga game on I think it was Sunday. Now Tonga are sort of a higher up team, sort of more experienced team than the likes of Romania, you might say, but they're still a lot lower in the rankings than the likes of South Africa. But the fans, they were phenomenal, and it was the environment behind the place on that day. Now, if you were running Rugby Portugal or Rugby Romania, what would you do to ensure that your country were able in 5, 10, 15, 20 years' time to compete with the likes of New Zealand, Australia, England, etc.?
Well, I think most countries in the world have got a strength and a weakness. You know, you've got to find these countries, what's their strength, what are they good at doing, you know, and work on that. But also, I think you've got to give them the knowledge. You've got to give the coaches, you know, I might get in trouble for saying this, but I think 2019 Rugby World Cup, I think 90% of the coaches were from New Zealand. I could be mistaken, but I mean, that's a fact of life. You know, wherever rugby is, there's a Kiwi somewhere. You know, and even we had a Kiwi as well, but we're not Kiwis, we're Australians. You know, so every country was unique the way they played. And I think that's what we've got to do. We've got to get the locals, players and coaches up to the way they want to play. You know, it's no good them trying to take the All Blacks on the way the All Blacks play, because you're never going to win. You know, so if you're a smaller team, why would you want to run into a brick wall? You know, but that's why it's good to see Portugal and Georgia play, because they had nothing to lose and they just threw the ball around, and it was actually a very skillful game. But when it comes to the other teams, they struggle. You know, so that's just the competition. I just think there's got to be some way where, to me, the biggest problem with rugby is the simple, basic skills of the game. The catch pass, you know, the supports. You don't see many offloads. You know, I mean, we saw the Fijian guy offload. It was an unbelievable pass. You know, once you offload in a tackle, the opposition in defence got to go backwards. And I don't think there's enough of that in our game. There's not enough of, it's just like run into a brick wall. And if you do watch the game, you've got to add a ruck. We've got the ball. I'm back 5 metres. The opposition are right on the line. As soon as the halfback picks it, the opposition advance, you're actually going backwards in attack. You're not going forward, you're going backwards. You know, and rugby's supposed to be a forward momentum. That's where rucking was so good, because you could just keep on going. I remember in 93, we played South Africa in Sydney, third test. And I noticed in the first 2 tests that from the old kickoffs, you know, the old 10-metre kickoffs, the forwards were mauled around, that the South African winger, Olivier, was back on the 22, and they had Uli Schmitz, the hooker, down the blind. So I said to Nick Farr-Jones in this game, I said, mate, if I see what's happening, I'll give you a sign. So I'll call it Leaguey. That's the sign. So we kicked the goal. They kicked off, got it. And I said to Nick Leaguey, Nick, you could actually see him look, nodded. He came around, took the hooker out, gave it to me. I ran 20 metres. I gave the Tim Gavin, took the ball up. Phil Kearns took the ball up. So they're going backwards all the time. And then I ran into inside centre, got the ball through the Tim Horton, scored in the corner. That's against South Africa. So you can do that if you're going forward. It's very difficult to do anything if you just... Like that's where Ireland was so good. Ireland are very, very good in defence. It's very hard to beat them. But once you get an offload and it gets started to go backwards, that's when the trouble starts. But the skills aren't there to do that, you know, and that's what I mean. Teams who aren't going to compete physically, they've got to have something else that's going to keep the opposition guessing. And I think the skill factor, the offloads, or just trying to do something different is an opportunity that we don't look at doing because everybody wants to be the same. You know, whereas I said, where you go, there's always a Kiwi coach and the Kiwis play what the Kiwis play. You know, we have Dave Rennie here, we had Robbie Deans here, but we are Australians. We play a different style, but at the moment, we don't know what style we play. And that's really sad.
It's a very interesting point you've made there. England, they're the next on our list here. They've now won 3 games in a row after being deemed the worst England team of all time. Now, I don't know how many of the games you've watched, but the England way they're playing is very English at the moment. It's not flamboyant. It's not fun. It's not sexy. It is brutish. It's from the boot. And do you think that's a reason why England are doing particularly well at the moment? Because they've gone back to their roots and they're playing to their strengths?
Yeah, well, as I said, every team's unique the way they play, you know, and I think that England, that's what they do. So why go away something that you don't know what you're going to do? Yes, they've got some great individual backs. But again, you know, what's going to happen when the opposition start to do something different or put them under pressure and they've got to start to catch up? How are they going to play? Will they throw the ball around like in 91? You know, they tried to throw the ball around, but they weren't used to that. You know, so you always stick to what you're used to. Look, I obviously the shock of Fiji beating England was a major setback. But again, they've got a lot of experienced players. They've got a lot of players who played in 2019 Rugby World Cup as well. So they're not lacking experience. I just think they're lacking confidence. You know, there was a lot of talk about Eddie Jones coaching when he left, and the first game they lost. They blamed Eddie for it. Now we've got Eddie, we haven't won, so there's a lot of talk. But again, you know, England's going to be in the quarterfinal where Australia's not. So, you know, who knows what's going to happen? And again, this side of the draw is a lot weaker than A and B side of the pool.
Yeah, sticking an England rose on your shirt when England get to the quarters. Then.
Oh my goodness, that'd be interesting, wouldn't it?
I don't know. I would. You might get a few comments from fans if you did that one.
True. True.
I don't know, Phil. Maybe we could have a bet on that.
I seem to remember. Was it an All Black jersey you wore years ago in Sydney? Was it one All Blacks or England?
No. I did the Haka in Australia, but also 2003. I remember I had to go to Oxford Street in London with that sandwich board.
Very good, very good.
So I won't do it again though.
Live and learn.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Very good.
So moving on to the next Northern Hemisphere sides, it's the big one on Saturday evening. It's Ireland against Scotland.
Yes. Yeah. That's
how do you see that one going?
Yeah, look, I think Scottish, if they actually, they're a very confident team. They seem to have got better. I mean, the South African game first up, it's never an easy game. But you know, they're trying things again. They haven't had the hardest games. This one's going to be really test them again. They're not going to Ireland will not give them any room to move, and they'll know how to cut down Finn Russell. And I think if you stop the playmaker, the rest stops. You know, and you got Van der Merwe on the wing. He's only dangerous if he gets the ball. They've got some good players. Again, the Irish I think they'll just get the points made and get out of there and just make sure they win.
And Van der Merwe, whereabouts do you rate him in terms of world-class wingers at the moment?
Yeah, look, it's hard because wingers don't get a lot of ball one-on-one these days. They get the ball when there's traffic, or they're out in the wing with nobody marking them. The ball kicks across. It's very hard. I think that's, wingers are the guys who, like, even you look at the Australian wingers like Corabetti, he's got to go into a ruck 5 minutes, have to dive over and score tries. He doesn't get the ball one-on-ones anymore. That's the whole idea of a backline. A backline is supposed to create space for the wingers. And when we got the ball, our job was to score. But now it's a very different way of playing. If you're not going to get the ball, it's very difficult to do anything. If you look at Hansen for Ireland as well, they combine well. They know what the talents of the players are, and they try and give these guys room to move. And again, if you look at the French wingers, if you look at the All Blacks wingers, those guys are scoring tries because they're getting ball into space. And some of the other teams aren't. And if you look at the Italian, the team with the little winger who's normally a fullback, he doesn't get much ball at all. But look at Colby as well. Colby's got to go. He gets the ball when he's got 4 guys in front of him. You really want one-on-ones, and that's where the game's changed, where the centres can't create or stop the opposition from drifting wide, to obviously get these guys a bit of room to move.
How would you counter that, David? Would you play through the middle quite a bit more and just try and stretch, and then is it very much a case of fourth, fifth phase ball you can go, or because like you're saying, strike plays off first phase are so rare that they end up in the corner at the moment.
Well, so what happens? As I said before, the problem with the game now is when you spiral a pass, you cannot go anywhere near the opposition because you've got to catch the ball, you've got to cock the ball, and you've got to pass the ball. Okay, that's why I cannot run half a metre near you to do a spiral. That's why they do it 2 or 3 metres back. If you look at a team gets the ball, they'll just shovel the ball along the line, not actually check any player. So the opposition just drift across. So the winger gets the ball and you've got 4 guys over there smashing him. When we used to run at somebody, you could do a lateral pass. So I could run up probably, from about there from you and pass the ball, but you're committed, so you're out of play. Now you can't do that. You have a look because they're 5 metres back from the scrum. We're 5 metres back from the scrum. The ball goes to the winger. They haven't even got over the advantage line. So all the opposition just drift across. That's what I've talked about. That's the rugby league way of playing, spiral. But if you can run at somebody and do the lateral pass, they've never been shown. If you go into 22, when was the last time we saw a loop? Give the ball, hit him up, guy loop, and then just run into space. You can't do that because guys have never seen it. Or a dummy switch in the 22. As soon as you run in different angles, someone's going to come out of line and the other guy hits the line. If you watch rugby league, that's what they do. But that's what we used to do. Rugby league, as I said, had a shocking, it's really bad for our game. And that's why now the defence is so good because the opposition is not really threatening. It's just one-on-one running, and always put the ball under the arm, and the way they do it is if you run at someone with the ball in 2 hands, they're not sure if you're going to run or kick. But if you put the ball under the arm, they know exactly what you're going to do, and it's easier to bend.
The Japan game, that's a big one. That'll decide most likely who comes second. What's your thoughts on that? Who's going to win?
Yeah, look, I don't think Argentina are going to lose. I think Japan has struggled. They don't seem to have that same spark as when they played at home. Again, when you're playing in front of your home crowd, there's just that extra boost you get. But I've been very disappointed with Japan. They just seem to be, I don't know, 4 years older. They just don't seem to have that spark. Argentina, I'm sure they're going to play through the forwards. Their forwards are very dominant. and they'll just get the penalties. And I just think that they're going to win pretty easy, actually.
Cool. In terms of Tonga, Romania, myself and Philip were obviously at the game Sunday. Chatted to a few of the Tongan players after the game, and this sense of sort of cultural identity was incredible within the Tongan camp, because of course you've got a lot of players that played for the likes of Australia, New Zealand, various other teams in the past. And even though they'd lost against South Africa, they performed incredibly well. They put three tries against South Africa, which is as many tries as South Africa have received in 9 games.
Yeah.
So they're looking promising, and even the head coach that said that for some reason Tonga seemed to keep their best performances for the final games. So this is likely to be Tonga's best performance. Obviously, for them, it would have been nicer if the performances had started at the start of the tournament. But so, how would you see this match going?
Yeah, look, I think it's really sad that Israel Folau wasn't playing, because I think he would have added a new dimension to their backline. Very, very skilled player. I think you mentioned something there, like, there's a few players from other countries playing, in the Tongan team, and that's been their problem, is consistency. Like you're playing against South Africa, who play together all the time. That's the combinations. That's where the pressure's on. That's where you start to let yourself down. But obviously playing in that Pacific competition and Australia and New Zealand has really helped Fiji. It's really helped some of the team, the Tongan team, and the Samoan team as well, but not as much, because there's still a lot of players who play overseas, and that seems to be the big dilemma. If you want those island teams to play well, the players have got to play at home consistently, but the competition's never been there. And I think that I remember in 2003 in Sydney, when I saw one of the IRB guys who I know pretty well, and I said, listen, I'd love to help the island teams. He said, well, you get a sponsor and we'll talk about it. That's back in 2003. I mean, there's so much potential there. And you could see by Fiji, by playing in a different competition, how much confidence they've got and how much discipline they've got. Because normally the big things with the island, the discipline really lets them down a lot. But this World Cup, it's actually been, pretty remarkable. And you've got to give credit to the coaching staff and obviously the players, because they're playing week in, week out. And I remember, years gone past, that you knew Fiji would give you 60 minutes of really good rugby. The last 20, they'd fall down. But now they're going to the 80 minutes, and I think that's a real benefit from playing competitions against some really good teams week in, week out. And that's how you learn. And they're one of those teams. Tonga's the same. And again, with Samoa, you've got guys who have played in different countries, a lot of experience. And I think it's just amazing that if these guys got more resources, they'd be a lot more dangerous than what they are at the moment.
It's a terrifying thought for those tier 1 nations. When you consider how incredible Fiji have been on the 7th circuit for so many years, they could bring that talent to the 15th circuit. And of course, they've got their final match in the pool stages against Portugal, who themselves have shown some real promise in this tournament.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Really, really frightening. Once again, I hate to bring it up, but Australia last weekend. Australia, of course, went down. I think it was sort of 14 points to 3 within sort of X amount of minutes. So, do you think that Portugal could give Fiji a scare?
I think the only thing that's and I think we saw the Fiji game against Georgia. It's against, for these countries, when you're playing a tier 1 country, you try and lift as much as you can. And then when you win that, you come down a bit of a lull thinking, oh, well, this is only going to Georgia. And you could see, Fiji, from the kickoff, they dropped the ball. There was a lot of things not normally that Fiji do. And again, that's just the confidence, thinking, oh, well, we've got rid of the big boys now. We played Wales and Australia. Let's just go through this. And that's been a lapse that's always happens. And I think 2019, I think Fiji lost to Uruguay because they just dropped balls and thought it was going to be a lot easier than what it was. So I think this Fijian team, again, because of what they've been playing in the Super Rugby, they'll they'll realise that they'll have to turn up. And again, you know, I've never seen Fiji really, you know, kick so many goals. You know, they're learning, you know, get the points, go back, do it again. And even against Australia, Australia didn't do that. You know, they thought it was going to be a lot easier. But, you know, Fiji just, you know, I think their flanker, what's his name? Yeah, mate, unbelievable.
Yeah.
And that offload he did last week as well for the Fijian second try. I mean, that's skill, you know, and that's where I think big teams need flankers like that. And I think that's where Australia struggles, not having a fetcher, some guy who's going to do all the hard yards. And when you've got players like that, that's devastating, you know, for the opposition, because every time, you know, I remember there was guys like Michael Jones, Josh Kronfeld. You've got all those players. You've had George Smith. You've had Back. You've had what's the other guy for England? Was a manager of the Saxtons. Richard Hill.
Oh, yeah.
All those great flankers. You know, they're always there, stealing the ball, and you've got to have someone. And Fiji have got one in the team, and one, you know, if you've got him running around, it's going to be very beneficial.
Yeah, they've certainly got the talent, that's for sure. And with this backing, this coaching backing, the understanding of how to win rugby games over 80 minutes, they could become an incredibly sort of terrifying side to play against. Now, of course, if they do sort of come second in the in the group, in the pool stages, they'll likely come up against England. Now, I know we're jumping ahead slightly, but if that were to happen, what would be your prediction for that match?
I think that England will probably realise it's what's happened. There's too much experience there in the England team, and I think it's going to be a lot harder than, you know, what they did, because, you know, I think before a World Cup, I actually must admit I've never seen games like those games before in any World Cup. You just don't play warm-up games against some of the best teams in the world. And I think England realise it's, you know, if they don't turn up, they're going to be in trouble. So, again, you've got to get through this weekend first. Once you get through, then you can start planning for the next week. And I think that's, you know, there's going to be some great games. And again, it'd be really good if Fiji could do it 2 weeks, sort of 2 games in a row. You know, because they probably upset England playing one style. Can they do it again? Will England learn, or will they sort of turn up and say, it's just not Fiji, this is quarter final rugby, and that's when the pressure starts.
Do you think for Scotland really to turn over Ireland, would you just fully target the ruck, or would you space out in defence? I mean, what would you think is the better tactic for the Scottish to target the Irish?
Well, I'd be taking. Well, I think Alan Jones said, you know, you've really got to attack their strength first. Don't attack their weakness, because their strength's still going to be around. Sure. So if the ruck is there, but try and it's very well. You know, if you have a look, I said when they played the All Blacks in New Zealand last year, every time an All Black was tackled, there's no Irish guy on the ground, so they made sure that they didn't commit. So you've got to commit them, number one, and even if you try, and it's very difficult to run through a brick wall. So you've got to try and find a way. How can we do it? Now, do you put a few grubbers through a small little chips first to get them thinking, well, will they run and will they kick? You know, everyone does the same thing. So if there's a brick wall there, they keep on running a brick wall. I said, mate, that's pretty stupid. You know, you've got to think about, okay, how are we going to get these guys to think? Do we have to change the game? And one of the biggest things in rugby, it's very difficult to change the way you play now because they're so programmed. And I remember Ireland 2019 playing Japan. I was at London Airport. And I think after 60 minutes, you know, Japan were beating Ireland. So what did Ireland do for the next 20 minutes? The same they did for the first 60 minutes. Because they can't change. They only know one way to play. So the only way to keep them guessing is trying to do something different. You know, and we have seen a few teams just do. I still don't understand why you do a box kick out of your 22 and you kick it to the guy at halfway, but in between the halfway and 20 the space. I don't understand why they do that. So if the ball bounces, and we've seen a few bounce balls, and the opposition are in big trouble. You know, one thing you learn in international rugby: never ever let the ball bounce. We saw Fiji, Australia, 4 bounce ball bounces, won a try to Fiji. Never, ever let the ball bounce. So you try and kick the ball into space, not kick it to where the person is. So if you can try and upset them by doing little things like that, we're different. And they're going, shit, guys, what are we doing? Do we rush or do we hold back a fraction? And you just got to be smart and understand the game that you want to play. So it's, Irish defence is amazing around the ruck, and they want you to do that. They just want you to run into them all the time. That's what they're good at. So, if you've got a backline that wants to run, create something. You've got, Finn Russell's always going to take the ball to the line. Saxon's, he's the same. He loves taking the ball to the line. So you've got some good backlines, but will they push the envelope, or will they just play a very conservative game just to win?
It's really interesting. I heard a South African attack coach, I think he's the Leon attack coach in the top 14, saying that he felt the next phase is exactly like you said, stop the long box kick down the middle between where the fullback is just that bit too far back for the ball and the defensive line's too far forward. And then he was saying with ball in hand, just getting in behind the rush defense, just keep those small chips in where there's nobody.
But that's always, even if you look now, if you look at the game, and when we were playing, is you'd never kick the ball away in the 22 because it's a 50-50 ball. Now that's all they do because there's no options.
Okay.
You've always got options if you can do a switch or a loop or run different angles, and that's what I keep on saying. I thought, why would you kick the ball away? As soon as you kick the ball away, you relieve the pressure. But again, that's it's just part of the way the game's gone. If you look at the Australian attack coach, he was a rugby league. He was a forward. He wasn't a back. So why do you have guys in positions who've got no idea about the way you play? And now it's really about power. It's not about. There's a bit of skill. But if you have a look at this World Cup, the amount of players, Ione in the first game against France, the first minute, makes a really good break. Doesn't even look like he wants to pass it. You look at Colby against Scotland. He did the same. He made a really good break. He had Fuff on the outside. He gets tackled. Try gone. Once you make a break, the first thing you'd learn is look around and see what options you got, and then try and get the person in front where you want them so it's an easy try. But again, that's just certain things that we learn after a while playing. But these guys just run. It's just about just going as fast as you can. And then at the last minute, okay, well, should I try and pass? It's too late.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's really interesting points. The final one from me, there's been a lot of debate. I probably obviously follow the Irish media circle more than anyone else about Andy Farrell essentially has gone locked and loaded every game, first choice, not making changes. Whereas like you're saying, the All Blacks are rotating heavily, the Springboks keep rotating heavily. And then, there could be a gap between that and the quarterfinals. Given the Irish sort of history at World Cups, what are your thoughts on Andy Farrell going fully locked and loaded every game, trying to build momentum? They were a little bit slow in the warm-up games. So my personal perspective is, as long as your squad's happy, you don't take any game for granted and build momentum. Because Andy Farrell always makes a good point of, well, I can only deal with what's here now. There's no point me planning for hypotheticals. So I'd just be really interested to see what your thoughts are on squad selection.
Yeah, look, I think I mentioned, continuity and consistency is important in World Cups. I can go by 91 for us, for example. We had two guys, David Knox and Richard Toms, did not play a game. So they were with us for the whole 6 weeks, did not play a game. You play your best team because you're there to win. You're not there to keep people happy. You're there to win a World Cup. And it's only one game a bloody week, really, these poor guys. If you think of 91, we played Argentina Saturday, Samoa Wednesday, Wales Saturday, Ireland, New Zealand, England. So there was no resting sort of thing, So every game you've got to turn up, and that's what you're built for. That's what you get paid for now. You're a professional, So those sort of things. The only thing I suppose you think about, and I think Dupont's a great example. I think when they played, was it Uruguay, wasn't it, when he got injured?
Namibia, yeah.
Sorry, Namibia.
Yeah.
That's a freak accident. But that's what happens. So that's why you go, shit, why did we play him? mate, you're going to get injured sometime in life, you know. So it's just one of those things. And consistency, when the pressure's on, the more you play together, the more you understand each other, and the easier the game gets.